My friends, if you remember in the last video, I showed you a Finnish minister playing a Ukrainian folk song Oi luci Czervona kalina on cello. It was beautiful and I figured I want to do something like that. Why can't I do something like that? So for you, my friends, for you only, I studied Oi luci Czervona kalina on accordion. We're gonna go on with the video and it's going to be the soundtrack for you. My friends, the first video we will open up with today comes from Ukrainian SSO Special Forces unit operating on these small islands on the Dnipro River. As you can see, the Dnipro goes into several smaller streams at the very end before reaching the sea. And these small islands have been contested ever since the Russian occupation of the Kherson Oblast. Now we have this stunning footage of Ukrainian Special Forces in two boats speeding across these waterways, clearing up the Russian positions. We can see a Browning 50 cal mounted in the front of one of those boats, and later in this video they actually open fire from these 50 cal on Russian positions, speeding full throttle. It looks straight out of a Hollywood movie. Now we don't get footage of this much because it's special forces, they don't really publish what they do. But from the Russian Telegram channels we have heard that these Ukrainian special forces sow a lot of chaos on these islands. Russians have a really hard time occupying them. Now later in this video we will watch what's going on with the Oleshki bridgehead that the Ukrainians have, and as you can see the Russians have occupied some new areas, but now some other topics before. But now, my friends, I'm going to zoom in. You see, this is the Russian city of Kursk, and if we go a little bit to the west we see a Russian settlement of Kurchatov right here. And we have this weird looking lake. I saw this weird path going into the lake. Look, I would love, I'm going running, right? I would honestly, looking at this from Google Maps, I would love to run on this path, both sides surrounded by water. Look at this. For a runner guy like me, this is paradise. But this is not what I want to talk about. The city of Kurchatov, last night we got reports of a weird kind of gathering happening in this city. It was a gathering of Ukrainian UAVs and missiles, and at some point when they gathered, something unexpected happens. It started exploding. Kaboom there, kaboom here, and the locals could not sleep because it's hard to sleep when the missiles are kabooming outside. This city was heavily visited by Ukrainian UAVs and missiles last night. As you can see, all of this footage comes from last night. We see here locals examining the parts of a Ukrainian UAV. You could say that it was an explosive party. One could even say that the gathering expanded fast. You know, it feels like it kind of blew their minds. Okay, I'll stop now. That's it. Anyway, it exploded in this city. Ukrainians have found some Russian targets in this city. They are probably destroyed by now. My friends, this here is Lugansk city and this here is Donetsk. Lugansk and Donetsk are two self-made people's republics occupied by Russia. And they have their own armies. And they are very well known for their poor equipment and non-existent training. They just send men to the meat grinders immediately if they find them on the street. About a year ago, I remember reporting that these Luhansk and Donetsk People's Republics were gathering men just from the street, snatching them, putting them in the cars and dropping them on the front line and say, go do something, go occupy Ukraine. Without weapons, without anything. Old World War II helmets. Well, now we have another video of these two People's Republics armies getting weapons from the Russian Ministry of Defense. But which kind of weapons? That's the catch. We get weapons dating back to World War II era and pre-World War II era. PPS H-1 machine guns, SKS Karabin, and I think I even saw an American Tommy gun right there. And then there is this Mosin with a bayonet. I mean, close quarters combat happens in trench lines, and nowadays they use shovels, and you can use bayonets of course, but the tactics have changed a little bit. Nowadays you usually grab your knife, you don't fix it on your weapon and then go poking somebody. As much as I would love to make fun of these weapons, I cannot. You know why? Because these weapons work and they kill the same way, and at close distances, about 50 meters, they are as effective as anything else. Of course, the Mosin is not effective because you have to reload it after every shot. It's a bolt action, and then you have to reload the magazine or the bullets inside. That takes away from its effectiveness. But if you shoot and hit with it, it kills the same way, and it's an accurate weapon. Also, these machine guns we see here, they might be old, but for 50 meters in a trench line, these bullets kill the same way and the weapon works in a similar manner. If it works, the lack of effectiveness of these old weapons really starts to show after 50 meters, maybe 75, 100 and plus. On 300 meters, you cannot compare it to Kalashnikov or any modernized weapon. 300 plus meters with these weapons, it's a bit difficult to hit anything. It's possible, but it's harder. What it really shows, I'm not making fun right now, but what it really shows is the lack of Kalashnikovs. Yes, such a simple sentence. Lack of Kalashnikovs for the Russian Ministry of Defense. They would not send these World War II era weapons if they would have Kalashnikovs to send. I mean, the main weapon of the Russian army is Kalashnikov. That's of course what they want to send. If they don't have it, then they resort to Mosins, PPSHs, stuff like that from World War II. So it really gives us an idea of the situation of weaponry, equipment, ammunition in the Russian Ministry of Defense. Also, if they would have working T-72s, they would not take out T-60s and T-55s. So people saying, oh, Russians have millions of Kalashnikovs, they have tens of thousands of tanks. No, that's what the Russians wanted you to believe before the war. That was the illusion. The truth is, they don't. Simple as that. They're lacking weapons. On this footage we see something that was very common on the first months, even the first year of war, but it's not common at all right now. A pair of Ukrainian Su-25s flying over Ukrainian troops, performing attack missions on the front line. Ukrainian Air Force is still active 1.5 years, 500 days into this war. A huge, many times bigger Air Force, the Russian Air Force, has not been able to suppress the Ukrainian Air Force and force them out of the skies. Ukrainian jets are still flying, Ukrainian choppers are still flying, and Russians are afraid to fly over Ukraine. Well, they can't actually. Everything they fly close to the front lines will be shot down. The only thing they do fly close to the front line, 10 kilometers max, is Ka-52. Any Ka-52 that has gotten closer than 10 kilometers to the Ukrainian front lines has been shot down with a shoulder-fire anti-air missile. This shows the Ukrainian resilience. Their air force is many times smaller, yet they fly. They don't have a navy, yet the Russians are afraid to sail on the open seas with their Black Sea fleet. We're now slowly starting to see the true effect of the Prigozhin's mutiny, because Major General Ivan Popov, who commanded Ukrainian units in the southern Ukraine, was released from his position. And we see our lieutenant was released, or some sergeants were dishonorably discharged. No, we're talking about generals. The top of the top. And these people are being released right now. I mean, Putin is taking his purge very seriously. You know why Major General Ivan Popov was released? Because he dared to inform the Russian leadership, we're talking about Gerasimov, about the grim realities of the Russian army on the front lines. Lack of ammunition, lack of equipment, weaponry, food, lack of training, lack of motivation. He dared to bring this information in front of Gerasimov and to Putin. And he was immediately discharged. A general, you don't discharge generals like that in a working army. Also, he dared to talk about the lack of artillery reconnaissance. One of the main things for counter-battery operations to destroy the enemy artillery. Ukraine is on top of the world with that, and Russians are lacking. And he, being one of the more capable generals, wants to fix the problem, and immediately he's let go. Of course, this hurts him. And immediately Solovyev, the Russian propagandist, picks this up and starts bashing him as a traitor of the motherland, traitor of Russia. I mean, this general was working to make the situation better for the Russian units. And what he gets for it, 30 years in the army, and now he wants to improve the situation, he gets labeled as a traitor. I mean, this makes some feelings, and he's a powerful man. Viewers of the Solovyev propaganda show immediately bashed Solovyev, but Solovyev accuses Popov of being too emotional for being a general. We actually have a voice recording of General Popov and what he thinks about it. And if the Ministry of Defense screws you over, who are you going to turn to? Prigozhin and Wagner, of course, they're the balancing power in Russia for the Ministry of Defense. Let's watch the video. Good evening, my beloved gladiators, beloved family, a united family. Needed to collect my thoughts. There have been many developments over 2 days. So now this can be said with certainty. I have been removed from the command, dismissed from my post. I mean, to become a general, it takes decades. And to be dismissed for telling the truth, just like that, 30 to 40 years of career in the military, in the Ministry of Defense, washed away like that, and you're labeled as a traitor, I would go over to the Wagner side immediately. Lieutenant General Lyamin has assumed command of the army. I await my ultimate fate, military fate, changes a receipt of orders for further continuation of my service. I was honest with you from the beginning. I was candid with you. I've closed the distance with everyone, the gladiators of the army, from the soldier to marshal, in our case, all the way to the General Staff Commander Major General Medvedev. Because we all perish in the same way, we fight in the same way, everyone is afraid in the same way. And it is painful and tough for everyone in the same way. I never differentiated, absolutely none, between you all, and I was always maximally honest for the very first day of my arrival in the army. Honestly, knowing about the story and listening to him right now seems like a general who wants to train his men, wants to make the situation of the army better, wants to fix the issues, and immediately he gets purged away. I mean, this is going back to 1950 Stalin terror, or Stalin's purge before the Winter War even, when Stalin purged the most capable generals, and that's why they took so many casualties in the Winter War. I mean, Putin is doing the same thing. This here seems like a capable general. So I tell you honestly, a difficult situation occurred with the senior leadership, when the choice was either remain silent in cowardice and to only say what they wanted to hear, or call a spade. I, in your name and in the names of all of the combat friends who perished, had no right to lie, and identified all the problematic questions that exist today's army, combat work and provisions. An honest man in the Russian army. No way, your trip to Siberia starts now. The fish rots from the head. The whole system is like the head. It's Gerasimov, Putin and Shoigu, three liars who don't want real information. They want sugarcoating. They don't want to be in touch with the reality on the ground, and this man is bringing them the harsh reality, breaking their illusions, their glass castles. So immediately, yeah, of course, he will be dismissed. Call things by their proper names, forced attention to the most important tragedy of modern war, the absence of counter-battery warfare, absence of artillery reconnaissance stations, and a massively sheep's death of our brethren from the enemy's artillery. Yes, we have heard reports about, for example, Russian Spetsnaz, a unit that's training takes a lot of time and is very expensive. They are being used as regular infantry, which means they're just being thrown away. You train these troops for special operations behind enemy lines, or storm operations to punch a hole into enemy lines. You waste a lot of equipment and money on these troops, and then you use them as cannon fodder. If anyone right now says, oh, the Russians have a doctrine or they have a plan, the Soviets had a fighting doctrine. Russians also have written a huge book, a very good doctrine, what they are supposed to have, but they don't follow it. If you read about the Russian doctrine, the theory on it is very good. Almost as good as the NATO standards. But the thing is, NATO actually trains and follows the standards. Russians, I think they take it straight out of Stalin's playbook. Kill squads are behind the lines to force people in the front, the Storm Z units, to go and sacrifice themselves. No equipment, no food is given, just go and die for your country. Lure out the Ukrainian artillery positions. So they have no doctrine. I also raised a number of other problems, expressed it at the highest level, candidly and rather brutally. Due to this, it appears senior commanders felt a certain threat from me, and swiftly, in just one day of light, conceded an order, and Ministry of Defense removed me from command and got rid of me. The price of speaking the truth in Russia, not in the Ministry of Defense of Russia, in Russia, the whole country is like that. The price of speaking the truth is being isolated, is losing everything, is being bullied. As many regiment and division commanders have said today, Ukrainian armed forces failed to breach us in the front line, but instead we have been struck from the rear by our own senior commander Shoigu, treacherously and despicably, defanging the army at the most difficult and tense moment. This is true. One of the best things for the Ukrainian armed forces is the fact that Putin has not changed Shoigu's position. Shoigu is incredibly incompetent, and he has not changed Gerasimov's position. He also is incredibly incompetent. And these people also don't get the real information from the front, not because it doesn't reach them. It does, by these generals, because they choose not to accept it. They choose to fire the generals and dismiss them. They have the information, they choose not to look at it. So it's a choice to be blind. It's a choice to make things like that. And I really hope that Putin will never change out Shoigu or Gerasimov, because if they are not changed, Ukraine will win. If they are changed, they might be changed to somebody more competent. I do hope this competent general will never get any position in the Russian army, because He wants to change things for the better for the Russian army, and Ukraine does not need that right now. However, I remain in the open communication with all soldiers, sergeants and officers of the army, absolutely for everyone, available 24/7. Any problems, household, family, logistical, combat. Any problems whatsoever, we continue our work in our group. I'm always accessible to you. It is my honor to stand next to you in the ranks. I'm proud of you, cherish you, and will do everything in my power and even more to make it easier for you to fight. And to ensure survival of more of our combat comrades, we continue to fulfill our combat missions, most importantly in the name of those who will never return from the battlefields. In the memory, in the name of blood that has been shed of soldiers and officers alike in Zaporozhye, together with you, we are obligated to crush the enemy, repel his offensive and create conditions for follow-up actions. And with this honor, the memory of our fallen comrades, always with you, always accessible, your Spartak, my gladiators. I'm honored and tightly shake your hands, and huge regards to all the guys. I mean, this guy has been hurt, and I feel like he's not the guy who forgets or forgives. He's the guy who is loyal to his troops. So where is he gonna go if he's really being dismissed and banned from working in the Russian Ministry of Defense system at all, or thrown out of the system? Where is he gonna go to? Of course, Wagner. It's the place of everyone who is barred from the Russian Ministry of Defense. Prigozhin is their god. If this guy, a very capable guy, what it seems to me, goes to Prigozhin, gets a following there, brings over his troops, Putin is losing generals. Either he's purging them or they're going on their own. Wagner is gaining power. This is the headquarters of the southern military district of the Russian army. This was the working place of General Popov, and now armored vehicles have entered the perimeter, and people think that these armored vehicles are there to actually arrest him or bring him away. We of course don't know, it might be just there to transport him whatever he needs, but knowing the situation, him being a threat now to the Russian Ministry of Defense because he's a truth speaker, these armored vehicles might be taking him to where Surovikin is. Nobody knows where he is. He's officially on a vacation. In the last video I reported on the Dune Hotel, where Lieutenant General Tsoko found his end. This is what was left of the hotel. This was the hotel in Berdyansk, in a very beautiful area, a very beach, seaside, vacation area. He liked luxury. He was visited by Storm Shadow and he was eliminated with some other generals, with some other commanders we're gonna look at later. This is all that is left from it. Nothing. This is what one Storm Shadow does to a building. Now this is what it looked like before, and what people in the Russian army have been telling the sources is that his issue was that he liked luxury. Being a general, you're supposed to be there loyal with your troops. Be there with your troops. But he liked luxury enough to need the pool, to need this extra vacant vacation home in the war zone. Of course, bystanders saw it, reported it to the Ukrainian armed forces because the guerrilla movement that is in connection with Ukrainian intelligence is huge in Russian-occupied Ukraine. And his location was reported, Storm Shadow visited, boom, he's gone. Now, along with the lieutenant general, there was one other guy, one other commander, a Muslim commander with him. His name was Hazan Timursiev, a deputy commander of OMON, which is the riot police or heavily militarized police of the Russian region of Ingushetia. A region that, if Russia is dismantled, could be their own country because their people are not Russian at all. My friends, now I will zoom into Russian-occupied settlement of Tokmak, which is a local military strong point, very heavily fortified and one of the main logistical hubs of the Russian army. As you can see, many roads go out from this settlement. Well, it was visited by Ukrainian explosive devices recently, and the Russian-occupied mayor of Melitopol, Ivan Fedorov, states that about 200 Russian soldiers and some commanders died on the Ukrainian attack of Tokmak. Ukrainians sent missiles and UAVs to the stamping plant of Tokmak, and a lot of Russian personnel was gathered around the plant. Their quarters were there, and about 200 KIAs. Now, the information is that Russian FSB officers who have family near Tokmak or relatives or friends, they're pulling them out. I mean, Tokmak is close to the front line. You can even hit it with HIMARS. It is not safe. But I'm surprised that Russians have such huge gatherings so close to the front lines. Haven't they learned? I guess they haven't. Now, my friends, let's go and zoom into Bakhmut, and on this footage you can see fighters of MK Kavkaz, or Caucasus in English, Caucasus. These are Muslim fighters, a Muslim volunteer corps who is fighting on the side of the armed forces of Ukraine. On this footage we can see them on one of the prominent heights around Bakhmut, facing down into Bakhmut. These heights, very important, as I have mentioned. Ukraine puts their heavy artillery on it. Bakhmut is on the palm of their hands, destroying Russian positions in a meat grinder. Russians keep bringing in new troops. As Ukrainian armed forces are advancing on the north and southern sides of Bakhmut, Russians are actually digging new defensive lines. These satellite imagery, what you see right here, they're all made in the past month. So Ukrainians are liberating Russian positions, Russians are just digging new defensive positions. They're in full-out defense mode. In the southwestern area, urbanized area of Bakhmut, somewhere in this vicinity, Ukrainians last night destroyed a Russian observation point. Destroying this goes under the Russian losses as special equipment, because usually these points are on a huge pole and there are camera systems on top which can see a day and night. They can zoom in many times and they can see Ukrainian movements. They have sensors on them. It's a high-value target, and you can destroy them with first-person view drones if you're very accurate. And it's an issue for the Russians because making these observation points is a problem with sanctions, because they require sensors and chips which the Russians cannot produce. And the latest information is that they are actually stealing Norwegian speed cameras on the roads, because they have the same sensors and cameras and chips inside them, and they're remaking them into observation points of the front line. Another information last night is that Ukrainians destroyed a Russian assault group and a Russian localized base in Glishivka. Heavy battles are going around on the front areas of the settlement, and Ukrainian counter-battery fire is incredibly active. Now, my friends, I will zoom into Hulia. As you can see, all of these battles, these icons right here, these are active battles going on in the past 24 hours. This means Ukrainians are not pushing on 3 different fronts, they're pushing everywhere to tie in the Russian reserves. And as I mentioned before, 9 brigades equipped with Western tech and armor have not even moved out. This is all done with 3 brigades from the counter-offensive forces. Most of the forces haven't moved. So they're poking everywhere, and where some greater localized success will happen, the reserves will move there. But now Hulia, actually Russians made a localized counter-attack, and it was successful. They actually occupied some windbreaks, these forest belts right here. They reoccupied these areas. Russians are revamping their counter-attack operations. I mean, political order is that not one step backwards. Putin does not like bad news. He wants everything sugar-coated, and the order is that you take area with any means necessary. So Russians are pushing heavily. Now, my friends, I'll zoom into Severodonetsk and Kremina axis. Russians have been very active with the counteroffensives in this area. Last night they heavily pushed towards Sarichne, this element right here, a very heavy push. And the information is that Ukraine, actually, first information about Ukrainian reserves moving, Ukraine brought some reserves into Sarichne. So they're really feeling the Russian threats here. Russians are bringing in more men and they're pushing in suicidal attacks, and it actually occupies some new land. So Ukrainians brought their reserves into Sarichne. Just enough to hold the line and keep the meat mincer going and destroy the Russian units. Also, Russians are pushing towards Pilakharivka right here. I mean, fighting over this settlement has been going on for a year. Ever since the front line stabilized right here, Russians have tried to take this settlement in suicidal attacks. But for some reason, Ukrainians, these units are tough in this settlement. And also, Russians are heavily pushing from Dniprova, this settlement, to the west right here. As you can see, the icons, the battles were happening in the last 24 hours. So this front is incredibly active. This information was reported a while ago, but I want to actually officially go it through with you guys. Russian and Ukrainian active tank numbers on the front line on the southern and eastern front have almost equalized. Here we have a graph. Russian equipment before the war and the current situation. Of course, these are very conservative numbers because Russians, by their own estimates, had about 20,000 tanks. But most of these tanks were T-64s, T-55s and rusted T-72s, which don't have motors. The real number of working tanks you can hop in and drive immediately without doing anything, I think pre-war 3.4 thousand is the correct number. The 10,000 is the number filled with old scrap metal. Now they have about 1,400 left of them because Ukraine has destroyed so many. Ukraine had about 987 tanks before the war, and then the Kharkiv offensive happened. They went into Izium and they came out with 200-300 extra tanks, and then the West started supplying tanks. So now they have 1,500. So it's equal, or Ukraine even has the numbers in the tank. Ukraine even has the tank numbers over the Russians right now, but most of them have not moved. As I mentioned, 9 mechanized brigades have not moved out. Heavy guns, Russia had 2,300 before the war. We're talking about Tulip, heavy gun, Kiatsun, and other huge big caliber self-propelled howitzers. And now they have 1.9k, which is unfortunately too much to deploy any huge Ukrainian reserves yet. Heavy guns Ukraine had 773 and now they have 1.1k. But the thing is, Ukrainian heavy guns are many times more accurate, more efficient. And since Russians are also having artillery munitions issues, the artillery fire has almost equalized, which is a miracle. And you can see the rest of the numbers here. Overnight, 17 Shahed drones were launched to Ukrainian cities and 16 out of them were shot down. I mean, nobody really reports on that anymore, but it's important to know, and actually someone who has felt the presence of it. For us, it's just numbers. Oh, 16 out of 17. 4 days ago, I was in Kiev, and we were out in a very high-rise building, open glass roof. We were having dinner, having some beers and dinner, watching beautiful Kiev. Suddenly, everybody gets this photo, this message. Every phone starts going on with this nuclear alarm, like, you know. It's very panicking, it's very loud, and I got very distressed. It said that Shahed drones have lifted up, or a Russian plane has lifted off. Missiles or drone incoming right now. Get to the shelter. And the reality of these attacks, most will be shot down, but the reality is incredibly scary to live like that, to go to school like that, to raise children like that. I mean, you hear these alerts every time. You're afraid because out of 17, 1 can get through and hit your house. Like the day before I went to Kiev, we actually saw a few coming through, and these Shahed drones were used to thinking about them as some weak, pointless drones, mass-produced. If they hit the ground, the explosion is insanely huge. It's 40 kilograms of explosives. It's more than one of the biggest artillery rounds we have. I heard those explosions. I was really scared. And now, my friends, we will very quickly go through the Russian losses of 14th of July. 550 Russian liquidated personnel, which is about 1,500 wounded. And since Russia doesn't really treat their wounded, that transfers into KIAs in the future. 5 tanks and 9 armored personnel vehicles have been destroyed, 24 artillery systems and 2 MLRS. As I said before, Ukraine is on the hunt for Russian artillery for the past 3 months. They cannot move out their reserves unless they take away Russian artillery capabilities and unless they get air superiority, which is F-16, because if they don't have those 2 conditions, they will just feed their reserves into meat grinders and they will be destroyed. Ukraine is smart. They're keeping their troops safe in the back because there are no conditions right now to put them to the front. 2 anti-aircraft warfare systems, 31 UAVs, 2 cruise missiles, 21 vehicles and fuel tanks, and 10 special equipment, which was also the observation point in southwestern point of Bakhmut. Now we have a video from Dmitry, aka War Translated, where a Wagner commander talks about the situation. Prigozhin's mutiny, we think it's the thing of the past. No, in Russia things happen slowly. You can see the aftermath of any event a few months later, maybe a few years later. I mean, the cracks showing in the Russian system brought to us by the Wagner mutiny, they're beginning to show now. This is why I want to watch this video with you. The mutiny story is not over yet, it carries on. And it's gonna get bigger and bigger every day. Good day, everyone. I'm the field commander of PMC Wagner, call sign Berserk. We are located in the brotherly Belarus, near Osipovichi, on behalf of the field commanders. I'd like to tell everyone who lost their spirit, that is all just the beginning. I mean, you lost their spirit with the mutiny, that, oh, we stopped. It's all just the beginning. That's the talk going on among Wagner commanders. They have not lost faith in their leadership, in Prigozhin. Our March for Justice showed a lot of interesting things without saying directly. I'll only mention the certain units of the Ministry of Defense that were allegedly stuck in traffic did arrive in the end to Rostov. The units who were stuck in traffic were Ahmad units sent by Kadyrov to fix the mutiny, to disband them, to destroy them. They were stuck in traffic and they arrived when the mutiny was over. By this guy, they actually arrived. They met. In the first minutes, their commander, a very decent officer, found dialogue with our Radibor. We arrived at the very interesting conclusions which eliminate some of our previous arguments. Thus, you should know that there are like-minded people among your loyal footman. Together we're strong, so I'm happy to please many of our supporters, friends. It's all just the beginning. I mean, what he's saying right now, we all know about, Ahmad unit, Kadyrovites, they don't like the Wagnerites, they're in war because Kadyrov was very bloody against Prigozhin with his words. But this guy is saying, no, it's not like that. We're on the same side. We are getting along. It's just the beginning. If something happens, Ahmad will be on our side and huge things will happen. This is huge information. PMC Wagner and its path is far from over. We're ready for global events and turmoils that the country and we are waiting for. Thanks to all who supported us from the beginning, for being with us. Together we're strong. Amen. It's weird how he says Amen and Ahmad says Allah Akbar. This is interesting information, and I think more information comes out day by day. I mean, the eliminations and the dismissals of the generals Putin is doing, the purge, it's all a reaction to this mutiny. It really changed the situation in the Russian Ministry of Defense. And Putin is paranoid, he's purging the army. And this purge, he makes more enemies to himself because all of the generals now want to join Wagner, who have been purged. This is just the beginning, I do agree. My friends, the time is here, the time to thank the most loyal supporters of this channel. Some of these guys have been around for years actually. I've had patrons for 5 years. Some of these guys I remember from the very first days of Patreon. I want to name you 5 new patrons with my Estonian pronunciation. Scott Spenker, Scott Koch. What's with the Scots? Any new names? Mika Rickardson, Stefan Romanishin. Oh, you gotta fix your name, man. Hakon Nordgaard. Thank you for these 5 people for the support. If you like my channel, Patreon link is in the description below. Also, my friends, I'll guide you to my Twitter account because 3 times a day you get the most important news about Russo-Ukrainian war in a most compact form, which doesn't waste your time. Also, check out my Instagram because everything I do in Ukraine will be there uploaded to my Instagram. I'll be going back to Ukraine in September, and you will see some good Special Forces material on my Instagram. I'll see you there. And until my next video, my friends, Slava Ukraini.